I learned I was replaceable while 600 employees watched and no one spoke. Evan Markham smiled into the camera and said, "Thank you for joining. Today is about momentum." He called it the Modernization Initiative, like a ribbon you cut, not a decision that cuts back. Nothing personal, he added, softer. We're moving forward. The word personal hovered anyway, awkward and unpaid. I am Vera Collins. For 19 years, I was Chief Systems Engineer at Northridge Infrastructure. I built the backbone people stopped noticing once it worked. Evan arrived with verbs and polish. Optimize, accelerate, realign. He liked progress to sound humane. He explained my exit the way you explain an upgrade. This role no longer aligns with our future. He didn't look at me. Civility can be brutal when it's used as a shield. The livestream counter kept ticking. Faces stayed still. Silence was approved. Then Evan said, "Meet Ryan Hale, who will lead our next phase." Ryan smiled with the confidence of someone inheriting a house he never repaired. "We're future-proofing," he said, "reducing legacy drag." He spoke in clean nouns. I recognized every system he dismissed. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend my work. I asked one question because it mattered. Who's signing off the transition risk? Evan checked the agenda. "We'll handle details offline," he said. Brisk. Ryan's smile tightened. "Risk is managed," he added, like a slogan. Evan nodded and moved on. Applause arrived on schedule. After, messages poured in. "I'm sorry, congrats to Ryan. Let's grab coffee." None asked what happens when architecture changes owners mid-flight. My laptop chimed again. Impersonal and precise. Architectural risk sign-off required within 14 days. No sender, no apology. Just a requirement. Evan was already selling certainty. He just forgot that certainty needs a signature. I closed the stream and let the quiet sit. I wasn't angry. I was alert. When people confuse progress with erasure, the paper usually tells the truth first, and somewhere between applause and paperwork, I realized silence wasn't surrender. It was position, timing, and leverage waiting for daylight to speak clearly later. How are you holding up right now? If this moment stirred something familiar, take a minute to sit by a window and let natural light rest on your eyes. It's a small reset you can do right at home. Tell me where you're listening from, because these stories travel farther than boardrooms. And if this feels like it's speaking for you, subscribe and stay with me. The next part shows what happens when silence starts doing the work. No one followed me back to my office. Not a manager, not a colleague, not even the interns who used to ask me how the system actually worked. I packed alone, slowly, because rushing would have felt like agreement. 19 years fit into a single box if you reduce them enough. A notebook with diagrams no one ever read. A badge renewed so many times, the edges were smooth. A mug from a client dinner after a deal everyone said was impossible. I didn't linger. But memories don't ask permission. Twice. When Northridge was weeks from collapse, I stepped in and rewired failing contracts before lawyers could panic. Those rescues never made press releases. They became assumptions. I wrote the operational standards people now treat like gravity. Vendors quoted them. Auditors nodded at them. Competitors copied the structure and pretended it was coincidence. Evan called that legacy. He said the word like dust. Down the hall, Ryan Hale had already gathered my former team. The glass walls carried sound better than respect. "We need to move past outdated thinking," he said, confident, rehearsed. The system was built for a different era. A few people nodded, grateful not to be targets. I recognized the code he dismissed. It was holding everything together while he spoke. An hour later, Evan's assistant emailed me a document titled Handover Acknowledgement. Clean font, friendly tone. Evan followed with a call. "Sign it so we can close the loop," he said. "This doesn't change anything." That sentence did a lot of work. I asked for time. He reminded me the company was moving quickly. HR tried next. "Just a formality," they said. "Standard procedure." The pressure was polite but persistent. the kind designed to make refusal feel childish. I read the document twice. It asked me to confirm a complete transfer of architectural responsibility. It asked me to say the system was ready for modernization. It asked me to lie. I replied in writing, brief and calm. I declined to sign and explained why. No accusations, no emotion, facts. Within minutes, another email arrived asking me to reconsider. Then another. The tone tightened. Deadlines appeared. That's when I started reading what Evan's slides never mentioned. The modernization roadmap, the insurance riders, the vendor clauses buried in appendices. Every path led to the same line, repeated with different wording. Chief Systems Architect sign-off required. My title was gone. My name wasn't. And for the first time since the meeting, pressure stopped feeling personal. It felt structural. I closed the box, sealed the tape, and realized they hadn't erased me. They'd only erased the part of the story that made them comfortable. The rest was waiting. I didn't feel angry when I sat across from my attorney. Anger would have rushed me. Calm kept me precise. He listened without interrupting, flipping through documents I had carried out of North Ridge in my head long before I carried them in a folder. I wasn't asking how to fight. I was asking where I still stood. The answer arrived quietly, line by line. Insurance filings, audit disclosures, vendor master agreements. My name appeared again and again, not as history, but as responsibility. Named responsible architect, required signatory, final technical authority. My title had been erased from the org chart, but legally, structurally, I was still holding the spine. I didn't celebrate. I didn't trigger anything. There was nothing to activate. The system was doing exactly what it had always done. It waited for accountability. I asked my attorney one question. Do I have to save them? He shook his head. Obligation ends where authority is removed. That afternoon, I wrote one email. No recipients copied for drama. No explanations padded for tone. One sentence. I no longer hold the role required to sign. I read it twice, then sent it. The message didn't accuse. It simply declined gravity. Evan called within minutes. His voice skipped the pleasantries. Don't make this difficult, he said. You know how this works. I did. I also knew what he was asking me to pretend. I told him the same thing I wrote. Nothing more. Silence followed, thick and unfinished. The pressure escalated the way it always does when certainty cracks. HR forwarded calendar invites. Legal asked for clarification already provided. Evan left another message, sharper this time, warning about consequences that never quite named themselves. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Paper was already answering for me. By the end of the week, the first pause appeared. A vendor requested additional confirmation before proceeding. Then another. Risk teams asked for signatures no one could produce. Insurance flagged the transition as incomplete. The modernization roadmap slowed, then stopped. Not because of me, but because no one could replace a signature they assumed would follow obedience. I watched it happen without satisfaction. Control doesn't feel loud when it arrives. It feels orderly. Evan thought resistance would look emotional. He prepared for confrontation. What he hadn't prepared for was refusal that stayed within the lines. The project didn't collapse. It simply waited, and waiting, I realized, was already a verdict. That realization settled my breathing, narrowed my focus, and clarified the boundary between responsibility and surrender. Because control, once acknowledged, doesn't rush forward. It waits patiently, letting others exhaust themselves arguing with paper, procedure, and silence they cannot command anymore under these circumstances now. I knew Ryan would sign before he did it. Pressure has a sound. And that morning, it was loud enough to carry through glass walls. Evan needed momentum restored, vendors reassured, and the illusion of control preserved. Ryan needed approval. Those needs met in a small conference room I was no longer invited to. Evan framed it as leadership. He told Ryan that decisive action separates builders from caretakers. He reminded him the board was watching. He said the paperwork was routine, already reviewed, nothing that would land personally. Ryan nodded. He wanted to belong to the future Evan kept promising. The risk acceptance form moved across the table. It was thick, layered, and boring by design. Ryan flipped pages, not slowly, not carefully. He skimmed headings, smiled at phrases like standard exposure and industry tolerance, and signed where Evan pointed. He did not read the footnotes. He did not ask who used to sign them. The pen hesitated once, then pressed down. I learned about it from an automated notification, the same way systems announce quiet changes. I didn't call anyone. I didn't warn him. Intervening would have required authority I no longer held. Silence, at this stage, was accuracy within days. Internal audit requested additional documentation, not accusations, just questions. Insurance followed, asking for clarification around continuity of architectural responsibility during modernization. The language was polite, the timing was not. Ryan began appearing in meetings with less confidence, his voice slightly tighter, his slides heavier with reassurance. Evan blamed process delays. He blamed legacy complexity. He never blamed the signature. Meanwhile, every report listed the same name in the same place: responsible party, accepting authority, final signatory, Ryan Hale. I saw the pattern before anyone said it out loud. The signature didn't transfer risk away from me. It concentrated it. Each memo, each log, each clarification request pointed to a single individual who had agreed, on record, to accept what he did not yet understand. Ryan stopped smiling in the hallways, his calendar filled with meetings he hadn't scheduled. When audit asked for explanations, Evan stopped answering for him. That was the shift. Leadership retreats when responsibility becomes traceable. I didn't feel relief. I felt gravity asserting itself. Systems don't punish, they document. And documentation, once complete, doesn't care about intent. It only cares about names. By the end of the week, Ryan's name was everywhere, and mine was nowhere, which was exactly how control begins. I watched from distance, measuring consequences instead of emotions, understanding that anxiety spreads faster than blame. And once systems start asking questions, no speech can outrun paper, signatures, and timelines already fixed by process alone for everyone involved without exceptions anymore now. I removed my name the same way I had added it years earlier, quietly and with intent. No announcement, no farewell note, no dramatic withdrawal. I simply updated the legal registry that listed me as maintainer of the technical standards I had written and carried for nearly 2 decades. The documents didn't change. The responsibility line did. Those standards were never just manuals, they were promises. To regulators, to insurers, to partners who built their operations on the assumption that someone stood behind every clause. For years. That someone had been me. Now. It wasn't. And that distinction mattered more than any resignation speech. I didn't notify Evan. I didn't warn Ryan. I wasn't required to. The update propagated the way truth usually does in corporate systems, slowly, impersonally, and without commentary. By the end of the week, inboxes across the vendor network began to stir. Who stands behind this standard now? The question appeared first as curiosity, then as concern. Compliance teams asked it politely. Risk departments asked it formally. Procurement asked it with deadlines attached. No one accused. They just wanted a name. I didn't supply one. Evan called an emergency meeting. I heard about it from someone who still trusted me enough to be honest. PR drafted reassurance statements. Legal prepared talking points about continuity and innovation. Evan told the room this was temporary noise. He said modernization always creates friction. He smiled the same smile he used on the live stream. Ryan stopped speaking in meetings. He listened instead. Pen tapping. Eyes fixed on slides that didn't answer the questions coming from outside the building. The standards he had dismissed as outdated were now being examined line by line, and each line pointed back to an absence he couldn't fill. I stayed out of it, not out of fear, but out of respect for the boundary they had drawn. Removing my name wasn't revenge. It was accuracy. Accountability can't be inherited by enthusiasm. The first real consequence arrived without drama. A major logistics partner sent a notice stating they were pausing contract execution due to unclear accountability under updated governance. No threats, no ultimatums, just a pause. That pause rippled outward, quietly instructive. Evan tried to project calm. Ryan tried to project confidence. Neither could project a signature that no longer existed. I watched from a distance, steady and uninvited, aware that legacy isn't erased when you remove a person. It becomes visible, and once it has a name, the absence of that name speaks louder than any presentation ever could again clearly. Nothing collapsed, and that was the most unsettling part. No alarms, no outages, no emergency calls in the night. The systems kept running, polite and obedient, as if unaware that certainty had been removed from the room where decisions were made. The pause arrived first in conversations. Deals that were nearly done stopped advancing. Certifications moved from approved to pending without explanation. Analysts began asking careful questions during earnings calls, the kind that sound neutral but land sharply. Evan insisted everything was on track. He repeated the word momentum until it lost meaning. I watched from a distance, not celebrating, not intervening. This wasn't victory. It was alignment. When accountability disappears, institutions don't panic. They hesitate. Hesitation spreads quietly, like cold air through connected rooms. Then the invitation came. A message from legal, carefully worded, proposing a short-term consulting arrangement, limited scope, generous rate, no admission of error. They framed it as collaboration, as if the structure hadn't already declared its boundaries. Evan followed with a call. Calmer now. "We just need your help stabilizing things," he said. "You know the system better than anyone." I did know it. That was never the question. I answered him evenly. "I'm not fixing a structure I no longer belong to." The line surprised him. He paused, searching for leverage that wasn't there. I thanked him for the offer and ended the call. After that, the silence changed texture. Vendors waited. Auditors requested extensions. Insurance maintained reservations. No one forced a decision because no one could own it. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it sits in the absence of obligation. Inside North Ridge, meetings multiplied without progress. Ryan attended all of them, speaking less each time. Evan filled the space with reassurance. But reassurance doesn't move contracts. It only fills minutes. The board asked for updates more frequently, and the answers grew thinner. I heard about the shift from someone who had nothing to gain by exaggeration. One board member had started asking a different question, not how to accelerate modernization, but whether removing institutional authority had created the stall everyone was now pretending not to see. The question wasn't accusatory, it was structural. That was the moment I allowed myself a controlled satisfaction. Not pleasure, not triumph. Recognition. The system hadn't broken. It had revealed itself. And once that happens, reversal becomes complicated. The pause wasn't temporary anymore. It was diagnostic. And someone at the top had finally noticed the symptom they caused. I remained steady, careful not to rush the process. Influence gained too quickly invites resistance. What mattered was sequence, not speed. Each unanswered question increased weight. Each delay confirmed pattern. Quiet authority doesn't demand recognition. It accumulates proof until denial becomes effortful, exhausting, and finally impossible for those responsible to ignore any longer without drama or raised voices. I didn't hear about the audit from leadership. I heard it from the tone of the questions. They arrived polite, narrow, and persistent, circling one phrase like a blade disclosure mismatch. It sounded technical enough to hide panic, but not enough to hide intent. Ryan was called in first. I wasn't there, but the aftermath traveled fast. Meetings cleared, calendars shifted. His name stopped appearing on cheerful update threads and started appearing in formal requests. Audit wanted explanations, not reassurance. They wanted to know why architectural responsibility had moved without continuity documentation. Evan reacted the way executives do when pressure becomes directional. He redirected it. In meetings, he spoke about delegation, about empowering new leadership, about how Ryan had assured him everything was covered. Each sentence placed distance between himself and the signature that now mattered more than any speech. Ryan felt it immediately. The shift from protege to liability is sharp. One day, you're the future. The next, you're a footnote someone hopes can absorb impact. He called me that evening. Voice unsteady, asking questions he should have asked weeks earlier. I answered carefully. Not evasive, not protective. Accurate. Audit didn't care about enthusiasm. They cared about records. The disclosure mismatch wasn't dramatic. It was precise. Documents referenced oversight that no longer existed. Approvals that hadn't been properly transferred. Risks accepted without full scope review. Each item pointed to the same name. Ryan's. Evan stopped defending him. That was the moment Ryan understood his role. He wasn't being developed. He was being positioned. A buffer between a flawed decision and personal consequence. The realization stripped the confidence from his voice faster than any reprimand could. Within days, Ryan resigned. The announcement framed it as a mutual decision, a desire to pursue other opportunities. No mention of audits, no mention of signatures. Just a clean exit meant to suggest resolution. It didn't resolve anything. Responsibility doesn't dissolve with employment. Audit doesn't negotiate with resignation letters. The name remained on every document that mattered, fixed by date and ink. Ryan was gone. But the liability stayed exactly where Evan had steered it. I watched the fracture widen, controlled and irreversible. Panic rarely explodes at first. It seeps. It forces choices too fast to be wise. And as Ryan disappeared from the building, the company learned its first hard lesson: you can remove a person from a room, but you can't remove them from paper once you've asked them to carry your weight. That understanding spread quietly, reshaping conversations behind closed doors, tightening voices, shortening tempers, and exposing how quickly loyalty evaporates when blame becomes assignable, documented, and permanent, because fear prefers witnesses who cannot speak, and signatures that never forget who held the pen when courage was replaced by convenience, ambition, and carefully worded silence that fooled everyone except the paper. I wasn't invited to the boardroom, but I knew when they gathered. Silence travels differently when people stop pretending. The questions slowed, then vanished, replaced by careful stillness. A closed meeting doesn't announce itself, it changes the air. Someone inside said it out loud eventually. We fired institutional memory. The sentence didn't sound angry. It sounded tired, recognition without courage. They understood what they had removed, and they understood the cost. Understanding arrived late. They also understood what admission would require: public correction, retracted roadmaps, a visible reversal of confidence. Evan had sold certainty. The board had approved it. Owning the mistake would mean owning the damage. They discussed alternatives. They avoided names. Silence became the most convenient option. That was when they reached out to me. Not formally, not publicly. A request for a private conversation. Clarification, they called it. Alignment. I listened without interrupting. They spoke carefully, circling responsibility without touching it. I answered once. You already chose. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. The words were factual. Choice creates consequence. Undoing it publicly would cost more than they were willing to spend. They didn't argue. Pain shows differently in rooms like that. It tightens posture. It shortens sentences. They thanked me for my time. The call ended politely. After that, the decision settled. The board chose quiet. They accepted long damage over visible humility. No press correction, no reversal. The stall would be absorbed slowly, blamed on market conditions, on complexity, on timing. Silence became strategy. I understood then why it hurt. Not because they were wrong, but because they knew. Knowledge without action is its own cruelty. I didn't feel victory, I felt clarity. Institutional memory doesn't shout, it waits. When it's dismissed, it doesn't retaliate, it withdraws. And withdrawal is a language leadership understands too late. I remained outside, steady, watching the cost accumulate in meetings I would never attend, knowing they had chosen silence. And that silence would speak longer than any apology they were unwilling to offer, while the damage continued quietly, predictably, and entirely of their own making, until acceptance replaced denial. And the company learned that avoiding embarrassment can be more expensive than admitting truth, especially when truth has already left the building, carrying nothing but memory, restraint, and the calm certainty that some losses cannot be recovered, only recognized, endured, and slowly paid over time without resolution, forgiveness, or return. The choice lingered with them, shaping every cautious decision, every deferred commitment, every explanation given to investors who sensed hesitation beneath polished language, until silence hardened into policy, policy into habit, and habit into the quiet legacy of a board that knew better, chose less, and lived with the end didn't arrive with headlines or alarms. It arrived the way consequences usually do when no one wants to admit fault, quietly, internally. Evan Markham didn't get escorted out. He didn't issue a statement. His name simply stopped appearing on emails, then on agendas, then on the website. Leadership called it a transition. Everyone else understood it was removal. Northridge didn't collapse. That would have been dramatic, almost merciful. Instead, it drifted. Contracts renewed more slowly. Invitations to industry panels went elsewhere. Analysts stopped describing the company as a benchmark and started calling it a case study. Leadership never addressed the change directly. They blamed markets, timing, global uncertainty. The absence of confidence did the rest. Ryan disappeared even faster. One day his profile still floated near the top of search results, polished and optimistic. The next, it was gone. No announcement, no farewell post, no new title, just an empty space where ambition had been displayed. I didn't search for explanations. Paper had already written his. I didn't feel satisfaction. Justice doesn't feel warm when it's earned this way. It feels neutral, almost instructional. Decisions accumulate weight. Eventually, something gives. Not explosively, structurally. I stayed out of view while the company adjusted to its smaller shadow. Northridge continued operating, but no longer led. Influence migrated. Standards evolved without their input. Silence became reputation. Then my phone rang. I recognized the number before answering. It belonged to the largest competitor in the sector, a firm that had studied Northridge for years without ever quite overtaking it. The voice on the other end was measured, respectful. They didn't mention Evan. They didn't mention Ryan. They mentioned continuity, stability, experience. "We've been watching," the caller said. "We know what happened. We also know who isn't responsible for it." I listened. They spoke about advisory roles, about governance, about lessons learned the expensive way. They didn't rush. They didn't flatter. They offered alignment, not rescue. When the call ended, I sat with the quiet for a moment. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't triumph. It was balance restoring itself. Northridge had made its choice. The industry responded accordingly. I didn't smile. I didn't feel lighter. I felt resolved. Justice, when it arrives without noise, doesn't celebrate. It corrects. And correction doesn't ask how you feel about it. It simply moves forward, carrying memory, consequence, and the understanding that power borrowed from silence eventually returns to the systems that respect it most. I didn't return to an office, and I didn't need to. The call that followed the silence wasn't an apology or a rescue. It was an invitation to advise, to guide, to help an industry remember what it kept trying to replace. I accepted the role without ceremony, strategic advisor, independent, clear boundaries, defined expectations and professional distance. From day one, the work felt familiar, but lighter. No org charts, no performance theater, just rooms where people wanted to understand systems before touching them. I wasn't there to rebuild anyone's pride. I was there to prevent the same mistake from repeating under a different logo, across the industry again and again. I didn't speak publicly about Northridge. I didn't correct narratives or reclaim credit. Those who needed the truth already had it. Those who didn't wouldn't have listened. Justice doesn't require witnesses once it's complete. It simply settles accounts and closes doors without asking permission from anyone involved anymore today. Some days, I thought about the younger engineers watching all of this unfold. I hoped they learned the right lesson, not how to win, but how to leave cleanly, how to document, how to respect the quiet weight of responsibility. Before decisions become irreversible, systems, failures with human cost attached. The industry moved on, slower and more careful. That felt like progress to me. Not louder tools or faster cycles, but better questions asked before decisions hardened into policy. I sat in on reviews, flagged risks early, and left space for memory to do its work without resentment or urgency. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns fuel you'll need later. What remained was calm, and something close to gratitude. The system held. Paper told the truth. Consequences followed choice. When people asked what happened, I answered simply, then repeated one line that stayed true. Modernization without memory is just demolition. I didn't win by shouting, exposing secrets, or watching anyone fall in real time. What carried me through was something quieter, knowing when my responsibility ended, and trusting that truth written down is stronger than power spoken out loud. This story isn't about revenge. It's about dignity, about what happens when experience is dismissed as inconvenience, and how systems eventually demand respect even when people don't. The real lesson I took from this isn't tactical, it's human. You can give years of your life to a place, build something solid, and still be told you're replaceable. When that moment comes, your worth doesn't disappear. It just stops being convenient for others to acknowledge. And that's when self-respect matters most, not proving them wrong, not chasing validation, just standing where the facts already put you. As you listened, what did you feel? Anger, recognition, quiet relief? Was there a detail that stayed with you? The unanswered emails, the signatures, the silence? I'd genuinely like to know what part hit closest to home for you. And where are you listening from right now? A kitchen table, a night shift, a quiet room after a long day. Stories like this travel far because they touch something many people carry, but rarely say out loud. If this story spoke to you, let others find it too. Leave a comment, share it with someone who might need it, and tap like if it resonated. And if you want to stay for more stories about dignity, consequence, and quiet justice, subscribe. You're welcome here.